In the end, all things we hold dearly will eventually come to an end. It is a reality we oftentimes like to forget. Even with all the preparation in the world, we always seemingly get taken back for when it happens. In the case of Khabib Nurmagomedov, his end was one which only very few could ever share, which was leaving the game at the very top. With the sheer excellence shown repeatedly in his victories, there was no sign of ever stopping him. Wondering what if has always been a go-to in his case. What if Khabib were to go for a record-setting 30 wins with no losses? What if he returned for one more fight against GSP? And even then, would he even finally meet his match? We may never know the answers to these questions. As always, in the end, only time will tell. Until then, I thank you for joining me once again, and welcome back to Keenan K TV. This will be the start of my Khabib vs GSP video series. To stay notified for each installment, be sure to like and subscribe with the bell notification turned on. With that being said, let's jump right into it. The world of mixed martial arts is filled with uncertainties, but seemingly throughout all of those, there is one thing that remains for the most part a certainty, which is at some point coming face to face with your first ever professional loss. In the case of Khabib Nurmagomedov, that is not something that is there. For the most part in his career, he has barely even ever lost a round, which is insane to think about in 29 professional fights. And not only that, he made sure to make his opponents not even look like they were on the same frequency as him. And that is something that for the most part in GSP's career, he has been able to do successfully when he was defending his welterweight world title. Yes, sure, he has had a couple of rough fights, but for the most part, such dominance in the welterweight division was rarely ever seen. However, as GSP was closing in on the final chapters of his career, where he fought Johnny Hendricks for the last time at welterweight and his final MMA fight against Michael Bisping for the middleweight world championship, we can clearly see that there was not a clear resemblance of pure dominance that has been continuously displayed by him. So right now, let us go ahead and first take a look at the final MMA fight of Khabib Nurmagomedov and see just how dominant he really was. His final fight against Justin Gaethje was a fight in which the first round 2 judges gave to Gaethje, and on paper that sure does look good, but when you take a closer look at the action within the round, we can clearly see that where the judges kind of gave the points towards Gaethje, but for the most part of that round, you can clearly see that the fighter who was still in control and who was still working with more effectiveness was most definitely Khabib Nurmagomedov. Not to forget that in the first round, at the closing seconds, he was able to take down Gaethje with relative ease, mount him, and almost submit him, but the clock ran out of time and Gaethje was saved by the bell. And as soon as the second round opens up, Khabib pretty much just resumed where he was left off and continued on mounting Gaethje and ending it off with a triangle choke. So even though Gaethje in the first round was able to land a couple of nice significant blows, which I was surprised to see how well Khabib was able to take them, you could clearly see and sense that whatever effort Justin Gaethje was putting out there, that it was a rushed effort that will be fleeing away within the next couple of minutes. So the fight in its totality was just another Khabib Nurmagomedov brilliant performance. George St-Pierre, on the other hand, at the welterweight division, before he retired and then came back, fought Johnny Hendricks in a fight many thought that Hendricks could have won. And initially, when I watched it live back in the day, I expected Hendricks to get his hands raised as well, being able to hurt GSP and make him look as human as he did. It was very much so unseen before that fight. But upon closer analysis, I can clearly see why GSP was able to win 3 rounds against Johnny Hendricks' 2. Being able to diversify his arsenal and adapt to the situation and present different approaches to Johnny Hendricks, he was pretty much able to beat Johnny in those buffer moments where Johnny was simply inexperienced and George St-Pierre's arsenal and ring IQ simply came into play. But make no mistake about it, by the end of the fight, this was George St-Pierre's toughest opponent, and going out like that, it doesn't immediately scream the greatest of all time. And so finally, when he did decide to hang it up and George St-Pierre was gone from the welterweight division, we saw a very entertaining period in that division, with the great classics like the Lawler versus Hendricks fights, the Lawler versus McDonald fight, the Woodley versus Thompson fights, and the Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington fight. The division has no doubt stayed very much so interesting, but as soon as Tyron Woodley lost his title, we really came to appreciate just how good George St-Pierre's run was in comparison to anybody else. And from that point on, considering George St-Pierre the greatest welterweight fighter of all time was pretty much a foregone conclusion. But then he decided to up his legacy and try and win the middleweight world championship by fighting Michael the Count Bisping. In that fight, we saw George St-Pierre move up a weight class, and granted, George St-Pierre admittedly said that it was a very hard time to maintain that mass, and so moving up to that weight division was pretty hard onto his body. And so fighting somebody who was heavier than his average welterweight, George had to really load onto his shots a lot more to earn the respect of Michael Bisping. However, make no mistake about it, George St-Pierre showed his elite level MMA game and just proved that he was miles above in that opening first round, where he was just seemingly looking invincible. Perhaps he got ahead of himself a bit too much and did a little bit too much, because as soon as the fight got into the later rounds, at the end of the second round, you could clearly see that George St-Pierre was a little bit more heavier on his feet, and Michael was starting to open up a lot more since George was throwing less and being a little bit more stationary. And this can be attributed to a couple of things as well. Obviously, his output was higher than his usual output, but at the same time, he was also weighing a lot more, so everything that he did required a lot more energy to do compared to his welterweight physique, which was a lot more lighter. And so as the fight was going on, George was still in control, he was still doing the better work, but you could clearly see Michael getting into the fight as well. Being able to open up George St-Pierre in two different spots, you could begin to see George St-Pierre starting to wear the damage onto his face. Nonetheless, his ring IQ and his technical abilities and his arsenal put him steps ahead of Michael Bisping, as he was able to clip and drop him, and from there he was able to sink in a beautiful rear naked choke. Perhaps if the fight had gone on a little bit longer, we could have seen Michael Bisping get more into the fight, because Michael is a fighter who was known for his tremendous cardio, and with GSP unaccustomed to the division and starting to wear some damage, the fight could have ended up very poorly for GSP, but being the champion that he is, George made sure that Bisping would be out of there as soon as possible. And that is exactly what champions do, and that is exactly why GSP is considered one of the best MMA fighters in history. In comparison, there is obviously no question that Khabib Nurmagomedov was the clear winner when it comes down to being more dominant and more consistent throughout the entirety of the professional careers they have both had. However, that does not immediately mean that Khabib Nurmagomedov would have won convincingly. The reality is this, however: both Khabib Nurmagomedov and George St-Pierre are both happily retired fighters. When it comes down to Khabib Nurmagomedov, it may seem like it is hard to believe that a fighter that is that good, that dominant, and that popular could just simply walk away from the sport. But along with losing his father and not wanting to continue without him, if we took a look at the future of Khabib Nurmagomedov, we would immediately see that there was pretty much nothing left to do. He has beat everybody that he had to. He has made more money than he could ever imagine. And to top it all off, he's the only fighter to retire undefeated in MMA with any true significance. And then for the most part, the same rules apply to George St-Pierre as well. He's the only fighter to retire twice on top of two different weight divisions. So then the real question becomes this: why would they come out of retirement with any seriousness to commit to such a fight? For one, they're in both different weight classes, so how would they be fighting? Is Khabib going to come up or GSP going to come down? I haven't seen Khabib talk about moving up anytime, so would he be willing to do that for GSP? These are questions that only time can answer. But there has been one question that time over and over again has been answering, and that is the question of when will Father Time catch up to a fighter? To be very completely honest with everybody, George St-Pierre, in my opinion, is not the fighter that he used to be. In terms of his appearance, that is very much so clear. He has gotten older, he has aged. His last fight was against Michael Bisping in 2017. And coming out of that fight, after putting on all that weight, GSP had gotten ill from that bulk up to that higher weight division. So fighting has taken a toll onto GSP's body and mind. And then if we look over to Khabib Nurmagomedov, even though he's getting older as well, make no mistake about it, he is still the very best there has ever been in the lightweight division. And in my opinion, right now, Khabib has been the best that he has ever been. So if we're going to be matching up GSP with Khabib, instantly we have a fighter who is in his prime against a fighter who is not. And that is a fight I am particularly not interested in seeing because it is not a fair fight. But one thing that is certain is the fact that George St-Pierre is the more complete overall mixed martial artist. He has more tricks, he has more techniques. In my opinion, he has better ring IQ because he has faced these adversities and he has overcome them, and he has always known how to adapt in a fight. But that was GSP back then. I don't know how he will be now. But looking at the grand scheme of things, regardless if this fight happens or not, I am happy with the way things have ended for both of them. Which leaves us with the question, who really is the greatest MMA fighter of all time? Perhaps this is not the right question that we should ask. Khabib Nurmagomedov is a lightweight fighter, George St-Pierre a welterweight. In respective divisions, both are considered the best to ever do it. And to try and cross them over to one another's divisions or make them collide against one another, at that point everything becomes a hypothetical and an uncertainty. Even if Khabib would go in there and fight GSP at this point, the GSP that was in his prime is no longer here, so it doesn't really make up for a correct answer and a true, righteous holder of that title. But in the end, to be even mentioned in this conversation is just a compliment of your accomplishments alone. And in the end, only time will tell what will truly happen. For now, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to this channel with the bell notification turned on. As always, I have been Keenan from Keenan KTV, signing off. Later.